Let's be honest, we all love freebies. You can't deny it. I surely can't. Everyone loves free quality plugins. And this Wave bundle with all updates included is exactly that. Wave's free plugin bundle is exactly what you need to create solid mixes. Now, I know what you're about to say. This is a sponsor video, true that, but hold on right there. Before you even think about changing channel, why don't you give me a shot and listen to yourself what these plugins can actually do? I mean, they are truly incredible. And I want you to listen to yourself the way I use them and let me know down in the comments what you think. I will be showing you my chain, undergoing the how and the why I use these plugins. From beautiful analog saturation with powerful analog modular EQ, compression, even convolution reverb emulating real-world spaces, Pels effects with bunch of stumps, and even a unique FM synthesizer, which we're going to take a look at the end of the video. I will be deconstructing a mix that I did only using the 7 plugins. Now, the song is called Bright New Day by the incredible artist Mary Collins, which I highly encourage you to go and support. I'm going to go ahead now and actually play the song so that you can get a sense of what the song is all about. And this is a mix that I started and actually done probably 2-3 years ago. I have completely stripped it down by all the things I've used and only used these 7 plugins, which we're going to be deconstructing. So I want you to hear the difference between how the songs has actually been molded. Now I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of the song because, I mean, what is music without playing a little bit of good music, right? And then we're going to go ahead and deconstruct the actual song. So here is A Bright New Day by Mary Collins. So, as you can understand, the song is screaming from warmth, but also as mixers, we need to be very able to understand that the direction of the overall production is making sure that the song can breathe. So we don't want to overcook things. And this is the reason why using exactly modelers of, analog piece of gear could actually contribute to further enhance the style of the song. I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the song before and after now. So I want you to focus first and foremost, before we start deconstructing the overall timbre of the song, on how was the song before we applied plugins. And as you can see, there's not a lot of these plugins applied. Just a very minimum, just to craft a little bit more the tone of the song. So this is the song before. And I'm gonna do 2 bars off, 2 bars on, 2 bars off, 2 bar on, so that you can get a good assessment of how much the song has actually changed.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy to open up without a doubt of what he stands to gain. Reinventing every word into a good intention goes unmentioned. But there could be a bright new day right beyond the life I always thought I'd lead. There could be a bright new
Now, first and foremost, I would like to talk to you about the plugins that I've used. Now, the Waves free plugins pack includes 7 plugins, 100% free. Let me recap, 100% free. So rather than browsing on the web or try to figure it out ways to crack plugins, which you should not do, now Waves is giving you the opportunity to use these incredible tools for free. Now, the first plugin we're going to be analyzing is the Lil Magma. Now, the Lil Tube is an analog saturator plugin. This plugin, it's sort of a secret weapon in a way because it lets you decide the amount of harmonic saturation you can actually bring forward from an almost sterile recording, especially if you're mixing in the box. The second plugin we're going to be talking about today is the Impulse Response IR Live, which is a convolution reverb. Now, the beauty of this reverb is that it's not only a kind of algorithmically a reverb, but this reverb actually features some samples that have actually been captured in the real world acoustics in prestigious spaces, but also from prestigious equipment. Last but not least, which I still have a little bit undergoing, we have 2 incredible pieces of gear. We have the EQ V3, which is an analog model. It's a Neve emulation. And then we have the V-Comp, which again is a Neve emulation of an actual mix bus. And we're going to be talking it shortly. Then we have a channel strip called Audio Track, possibly one of the greatest gate I've ever used so far. I mean, the EQ section is great. The compression section is also great. But the gate section, we're going to be discussing shortly, is something that really stood up to me. And that could be a very good weapon in your arsenal of plugin. Then the last 2 plugins we're going to be analyzing are the GTR Solo, which is pretty much a collection of stomp pedals and effects that are really good to be used on synthesizers, pianos, and of course guitars. And last but not least, I will open it up later on to let you see the power of this plugin. We've got the Flow Motion. Now, Flow Motion is an FM synthesizer, extremely powerful. It gives you 4 oscillators upon which you can actually change the entire envelope. But we're going to be discussing about this later on in this session. So let me just hide this plugin. Oh, one more thing I was about to forget. There is more to this. As you know, a lot of companies and a lot of plugins generally undergo updates, which in many cases are chargeable. In this case, any future update for this bundle is completely free, no extra charges. So even there's going to be new updates, everything is going to be for free. In addition to these plugins also, there is a pack that includes Wave Studioverse with the same chains of plugins we're going to be using, so that you can actually customize it upon your liking. And I'm going to make sure to actually include a Studioverse version of all the plugins that I've used here so that you can actually start playing around with your sessions. But now, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and actually start deconstructing this song. We already played the before and after, so there is no longer need for me to doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and start straight from the mix bus. On the mix bus over here, on the mix bus, sorry. On the mix bus over here, I have 3 plugins in a sequence. So right now, the first plugin in the chain is the Lil Magma. What I want to do is show you how actually this plugin, based on the amount of input level you're going to put through the drive, can actually add an extremely rich amount of harmonics, all integer of the fundamentals, that are actually capable of bringing forward a lot of warmth and kind of like taming down unwanted digital peaks. So this is the mix bus first with all the processing applied. And I'm gonna go to a section of the song, which is, actually, let's go here. All right. That only has the instrumental. So this is with the mix bus applied. Without mix bus. With. So you hear that the entire chain of this mix bus processing is actually helping to further warm up the entire track. And I know I'm kind of like overusing the term warmth, but I have no other ways to letting you really focus on, you know, the type of sounds we're grasping over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and bypass the next two plugins and just start working a little bit with the Lil Tube. So this is without the Lil Tube. With. So pretty much Lil Tube is the actual texture of the tone that I found for my song. And you can actually drive the sensitivity of this box with the three type of sensitivity knobs that you have here: soft, normal, and high. The amount of saturation you're gonna get and push within the circuitry is dependent on the drive. So right now my drive is approximately at 29. Let's see what happens if I just crank the drive. Now, of course, as you noticed that the more I was pushing the drive, the more we had this LED that flashes that when our track is going to be slightly too overloaded, and I start to hear a little bit of distortion within the bass. Again, I'll put it back where it was at 59. Focus on the bass. Did you hear the difference? Again, before. After. So I'm gonna bring it back at 29, sorry. And this is again before. After. So through the Lil Tube as a first insert on my chain, I was actually capable of shaping the overall timbre of the song. Next in line, I want to further shape the actual texture of the song with an EQ. In this case, I'm using the VEQ. Now, pretty much the VEQ is a solid emulation of the landmark 1073 and some characteristic of the Neve 1066 EQ, which they have both unique way of performing, especially the bell curve. The way this plugin is actually been built is you have pretty much 4 parameters plus an output, where you have a high pass filter, fixed frequencies, so you have a shelf at 35, 60, 100, 110, and 210, and then you actually have a bell filter that goes from 0.36 up to 7.2K, with a fixed bell, and a high shelf 10K, 12K, period. Plus, of course, your output and your analog emulation. Now, over here, the beauty of this is that the bell curve of this equalizer allows you to push additional gain to specific frequency. You can actually add about 12 to 18 decibels of gain without encountering any problem with filtering ringing. Now, this EQ is rather spectacular because, again, it's easy to use, very few processing, and it's very musical in a way that you're going to be able to right out of the bath, being able to work with this EQ and figuring out exactly what are the most essential frequencies in the mix. Which in this case, this is the reason why all records sound so musical and beautiful, because they didn't have to, browse across a million, frequency points. They have fixed frequency, 3 knob, and they were making music. That's what also we refer to rock and roll. Now, in this case, I didn't use any high-pass filtering with this EQ. I simply boost 2 dB at 60 Hertz, and I gave maybe 0.9 at 12,000 Hertz. And this is what this EQ brings to the mix. With. Without. With. It's crazy. We're not, reshaping the wheel nor inventing the wheel, but yet with these 2 simple moves, all of a sudden just the mix has acquired a lot of breadth because the high end opened up, even if I'm just using almost 1 dB at 12K. So I will bypass the 12K so that you can hear the difference. And the way that this EQ works is you have 2 knobs within 1 knob. So the black ring lets you select the type of frequency. The white ring in the center lets you boost or cut a given frequency. Let's go with 12K off, just to let you hear the difference in brightness. On. Again, 1 decibel difference. Listen what a massive difference it does in the overall space imagery of this song. I'm gonna let you hear the same thing with this 2 dB added at 60 Hertz. So this is without. With. All of a sudden we got a much fuller low end. The bass and the kick drum kind of like solidify, but again, given the fact that this is an analog EQ, the crossover point upon which the shelving is actually being designed is going to cover slightly, upper frequencies within the range. Therefore, we're going to kind of like create this smiley phase that makes the overall mix sounds very full. Last but not least, I want to talk to you about the last processor on my mix bus, which is the V-Comp. Now, the V-Comp master bus is an actual mix bus compressor and limiter, with also an additional feature, a de-esser built in. The V-Comp accurately modeled the 2254 mix bus limiter compressor. And this means that this type of compressor provides an extremely good and truthful sort of vintage depth to the sound. It's slightly more aggressive than a 33609, but it has a bit more features. Now again, I'm not compressing a lot here, but as in every Neve compressor, the release time of the compressor section, which can be found on the bottom left corner, the 100 milliseconds is possibly some of the most musical release time for this specific unit. So I'm going to let you hear first with and then without, and we're going to talk a little bit about the different parameters of this compressor. This is with. Without. With. So what was I after with this compressor? The reason why I generally work with Neve compressors on the mix bus is because the total harmonic saturation, especially in the low-mid frequencies that this specific unit brings forward. Now, again, given the type of songs we're dealing with, I didn't need an extremely amount of compression, but something that could tame down the slightly picks of the kick drum and the snare and glue together the low end of the guitars, vocals, and bass. And this is exactly what this compressor is doing. As a matter of fact, without the compressor, focus on the difference between when the kick hits, how the entire balance of the song kind of like shifts off. And once this compressor is on, now kick and the rest of the music kind of like glue together in a very musical way. So this is without. Focus on the kick drum and the bass first. With. Again, we are not compressing much. We're using a 4:1 ratio, slow attack. Over here, you can only choose between slow and fast. You have an auto release, which is not always a great deal for mixed bus compression, depending from the program material. You have a limiter section, which in this case I'm not engaging, but what I am engaging is a de-esser, so that this compressor could actually tames down some of the S's of our singer. Again, I'm going to let you hear the entire mixed bus chain without and then with. With. I mean, massive change. All right, I think it's about time we move to analyzing track by track how I've used the rest of this incredible bundles of plugins. And of course, we can't have a country or folk records without focusing on our drums. I'm gonna start by bypassing or actually muting all my effects and start with my bare drums. So this is the sound of my drums without anything. This is the sound of my drums with everything applied. Able to catch the difference? I'm going to replay it once again, just for your amusement. I mean, night and day. I'm going to go to a different section of the song. All right, let's go and mute all the effects and also go one by one towards what we did here. I'm going to start by only listening to the kick drums. So we have a sub kick and a kick in. Now let's start with the sub kick, which in this case I've decided to prioritize for this song. The first plugin is just to invert the phase between the kick in and kick out, which, if I'm not remember wrong, we did already on the board, but let's see. Yep, we already did it. So, how did I start this track? Well, first and foremost, I insert an audio track, the channel strip I was telling you about. This channel strip is extremely versatile because it allows me to actually add specific EQ points. And again, it's not a lot, but it's very efficient. The less you have, that means the more creative and more musical you have to become, rather than having a million points of EQ. And with this EQ, I carved out almost 16 decibel, which is quite a lot, at 89 Hertz with a high pass filter. And again, you can change the type of filters you have over here. at 62 Hertz and apply a little bit of gating to tighten up the low end and some compression. You hear how much more control we have of the low end versus, initially where the low end is kind of like overwhelming the overall sound of the kick. So with the gate, we have limited a little bit of the bleeding of the snare, and with the compressor, we have tightened up the performance with a rather medium fast attack and medium fast release time. Second in line, we have reshaped a little bit the tone of this kick drum with a high pass filter at 45 and 6 dB at 100 Hertz. Without. Last but not least, again, this is a mixed bus processor, but nevertheless, you are the artist here. So there's no actual rules if you know how to use it. As you're going to see in a lot of the single tracks, I've used a more mild ratio. So I found that 1.5.1 to 3:1 top works really well with single tracks. Again, in this specific instance, I've used an auto release time, and then I used a little bit of limiting just to tighten up the low end. You hear how now the kick drum is just there, present, but not overwhelming the rest. Let me just actually mute the kick in so that you can have a better perspective. The reason why I left the kick in, it's because while I'm mixing the sub kick, I also want to have the counterpart, the most important part, the click of the kick drum being present, so that I know that my EQ moves are always in relationship to the actual kick in. For the kick in instead, I'm going to mute the sub kick so you can hear it a bit clearly. As I said, as a first plugin in the chain, I've used my audio track channel strip, removing a tiny bit at 663 Hertz with a shelving filter rather than a high pass filter in order to avoid ringing or outer phase problems at approximately 100 Hertz. So over here, the performance, it's tight, but we want to tighten it up and again, reduce mildly the bleeding. And this gate actually has a very good and very musical floor or kind of like range, so that I brought back a little bit of the snare drum, but in a much smaller dose. So this is without. And this is with. So now we're starting to have a kick sound with the sub kick. Only kick in. So now that I've kind of like further shaped my sound, it's when I'm going to start coloring the sound. So remember, I'm using some sort of like linear processing as the very first stop for my music. And then I'm going to start coloring it with more musical and richer in terms of sounds tools. Again, here I'm using a V3 EQ, 1073 style EQ, carving out a little bit more, 50 Hertz, boosting 1 dB at 100 Hertz, and giving a little bit of punch at actually 1 dB at 3.8, and then last but not least 0.3 dB at 10K with a shelving. This is without. This is with. You hear also that the beauty of this EQ is that it's kind of like taming down right out of the bath unwanted frequency, like very nasally, honky frequencies. And then controlling a little bit of the low end with the compressor. You hear that toom, toom. The following kick drum is rather loud. So right now I want to control that with, again, a mild compression, a 2-to-1, slow attack so that the transient pushes through, and 100 milliseconds of release time. See, focus on this first two hits. The first one is softer than the second one. Without. Now, with the V comp on, you hear there's still dynamic, but it's more controlled. So we don't have any more a huge gap in terms of difference of dynamic range. Snare drum. So over here we have actually 3 snare drums that sound something like this. So we have a brash and then we have the stick. Now I've recorded this one with a 441 and a 451 on the top. 2 very different sounding microphones. This is the 441. And this is the 451. So this 451 gives me a bit more extra lush on the actual brash. And then we got the snare bottom recorded with an SM81. Now, what I think this snare drum was lacking was in a little bit of attack and presence. So again, as I did for the kick drum, I've used my linear processing first to further kind of like bring the snare drum on an optimum level that then I could further tweak. So over here, focus on the transient. So the attack is what I wanted to bring forward. I wanted to bring kind of like more at unison the type of the sound of the brush with a slightly longer release time, but then I want a fairly longer attack so that the initial transient and punch of the snare drum could actually come through. Removing, of course, with my linear EQ, some of the, low end mud. Sorry, this is without. This is with. And last but not least, I haven't used any compression here yet, but I've used a Neve style EQ to kind of like further embellish the sound of the snare. Without. With. The process kind of like went the same for the rest of the drums, which I'm going to let you hear. Now without, again, all of them. And then I want to discuss quickly our effects. In terms of effect, what have I used? First and foremost, I've sent my drums to 2 different types of reverbs. One reverb covers the overall drum kit. Oh, let me actually go here. One reverb covers the entire drum kit. And I've used an AR live. In this case, I have calculated the amount of reverb time. So I've modulated a little bit the live room too, and also ducked out some of the highs so that we didn't have a lot of weird kind of like high frequency interactions with this room. Now the beauty of this is that I was able to properly position the drum kit in a much different room that would resonate a bit more with the scope of the song. So this is the drum kit with ER, first without and then with. Without. So this is without. With. Just in case you haven't heard the effect, which is there, but very subtle, I'm gonna crank the volume so that you have a better perspective of it. Without. With. Now that you've heard the type of room, I'm gonna just bring it down to the same level it was before, and I'm gonna let you hear it again, without and then with. You have just this slap back and this sense of glue that just grabs every single instrument of our drum kit and kind of like glues it together towards having a unifying sound. And then I felt like adding a plate reverb only to the snare. So what I've did to my snare is, again, taming down a little bit of the low end and actually using the gate. I'm gonna let you hear this in pre-fader so you don't get confused. So I've used the channel strip in this case first to make sure there's no other elements other than the pop of the snare. Well, this is no elements at all. So right now, let's actually hear it in context. We can actually increase the floor. Great. This is what the snare actually is. With the gate. And I purposely left a little bit of floor so that we have this longer decay that almost sounds the snare rattling. After that, I've added an ER impulse response with a plate on it. So this is the drum room or drum kit without the plate. This is with the plate. Which right now it seems a little too much, but in context I can promise you this is just helps to sustain the tail of the snare. Last but not least, the same thing I did for my snare, which was using the beautiful gate of the audio track, I did it for my kick and snare. So I've created a bus which sends kick and snare to this purple track over here, which is my parallel kick and snare. I've used almost the same settings, but a slightly more brutal gate settings just to keep the initial punch and transient of the kick and snare. Without. With. Now that I've carved out only the part of the sound that I wanted, I added a little magma to add a little bit more depth and presence to the kick and snare low end. With. You heard how much character we brought out, and then eventually added a little bit of EQing. So this is without. This is with. The 3K and the 10K actually telling the trick. So right now this is my parallel kick and snare compression, which are going to help to further enhance the punch and the weight of these two instruments within the mix. So this is without. And this is with. Without. With. This is pretty much the sound of the drums, which again, the reverb right now, not in context, and this is the thing, you should not ever listen things out of context. This is just for demonstration purposes. Sounds a little bit overkilling, but I can promise you that once we bring this in the song,
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
you just have this slap back reverb that just further increase the decay of the drums. Let's move along to the bass. So with bass, we have two sounds. We have a DI. Sorry, let me just remove the pre-fader. There is somebody that it doesn't want to listen to me. And do this, we're gonna just simply mute it. And then we have our bass cab. So two different treatment for these basses. First and foremost on the DI, which had a lot of character, I used the Lil Tube. We kind of gained back all that low end that the DI was lacking of. And on the actual amp, I've used an audio track channel strip to bring forward a little bit of the nose of the bass. And using a little bit of the gate and compressor just to smooth out the sound. So this is the sound of the bass, both microphones without processing. And this is with. Listen how well the sound goes with the drums in. So this is the bass without processing and the drums. And this is the bass with the drums with processing. I mean, the entire relationship between these two instruments just changes. Now they are actually working as a companion. Needless to say that this performance was recorded live to tape, to Pro Tools, but it was eventually live. For the acoustic guitar, what we have there are some vocals recorded in it, because as I said, this was the acoustic guitar of our lead singer and she was actually singing and playing. Therefore, you have some bleeding. So I wanted to treat this very carefully. And as you can see, all three of my microphones have had the exact same processing. The only difference is the level of compression. But the thing I wanted to do the most was kind of like attenuating low end past the 1 kilohertz with a shelving filter, and kind of like obtaining a little bit of more compression so that the high harmonics won't actually overload the microphone. So this is guitars with no reverb and no processing. There's a lot of bass, as you can hear, because they were in the same room. So let's see if with this channel strip I was able to tame down the bass a tiny bit. So two things you have to focus. A, taming down the bass. B, that note, it's very loud and it's kind of like pokes through the mix. So with. Were you able to hear the difference? Again, without.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
It's just crazy how this processor can keep everything on track. Everything is just under control, so that then I can add a healthy level of reverb. And again, I'm using an AR once again. In this case, I use a chamber. Why? Chamber, like holes, makes you think about height. So rather than recreating a space, I wanted to imprint a bit more airy feeling to this performance. And hopefully I was capable of doing it through this reverb. So this is without reverb.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
This is with.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. To open up without a doubt of what he stands to gain.
Without.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
No one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
We're just contexting things in a completely different way, allowing that you can say contexting and not contextualizing things. But this is a whole different story. English is not what we're discussing today. For the electric guitar, instead, we have again our bass. So again here, we're using a spring reverb. The spring has this characteristic, which is a very, some sort of, I wouldn't say one-dimensional, but kind of one-dimensional reverb. And due to the nature of the spring that actually acquires the sound from one side of the transducer, and then the spring start vibrating, and the other hand of the spring picks up the reverb side, serves to amplify or further amplifying the vibration inside this box of the tone of the guitar. So this is without the reverb. Focus on the length and the decay of the sound. With reverb. Is almost having a doubling effect on the right hand side, because the way I use this is panning things accordingly. So the guitar's acoustics are on the right, the reverb is on the left. The acoustic or the electric guitar is on the left, the reverb is on the right. And last but not least, I had a guitar DI. And I thought, how can I actually add further interest into this very sad sounding DI? Well, I added a guitar solo and I added a delay and a chorus. Now, bear in mind, you can tweak things inside this plugin in ways that many other amp simulators don't allow you. And in this case, I've tweaked a little bit of the amp, adding a bit more mids and treble, reducing the bass, choosing the right amount of drive, choosing, of course, the type of microphone on axis, the cabinet, and adding my stomps over here. And this is what the DI sounds without and with. So the way I've used this is more as a sweetener, so that right now our electric guitar could have a companion left to right that kind of like gives us this ear candy type of sensation of sounds coming from all over the space, but also bouncing back at us. With the acoustic. And over here we have two vocalists, so let's try to dive in on what I did on Mary, which is the lead vocalist here. So first and foremost, I insert de-esser. No, this is not packed with the bundle, but you can always purchase it. It's up to you. It's a phenomenal de-esser, which helps to kind of like in split mode, help me to decrease the amount of S's that the singer has. But we're not here to talk about that plugin. We're here to talk about these three plugins, the Magic Trio. So here what I did, again, went in linear, reduced a little bit of the perceived frequency at 1 kilohertz.
And no one ever thinks to or
Let me actually mute her reverb.
and no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
So the frequency I reduced is this one over here.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it is.
You hear how much this frequency is kind of like, frightening our ears. And pretty much with this EQ, I've only attenuated annoying frequencies and used the compressor to tame down the initial part of her performance. So this is without.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
The beauty of this plugin is how much throatiness it brings forward with the compressor, but also how natural the EQ is. I mean, I'm removing 6, almost 7 decibel, and yet the vocals just come forward so natural and bringing forward all the characteristic I believe we used in Neumann M149, which is a tube microphone, very airy, very open, but also very unforgiving. So this is without again.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
See how this compressor is actually bringing the vocals forward with a slightly lower attack time so that the transient actually pokes through, and a medium release time. Of course, everything has been matched to the BPM of the song. Then is where the magic happens, when we start adding color. So a 33609, actually 1073 model, or the VQ3 by Waves, helps me to add a little bit of 2.4 to add a bit more, I would say, edge to the vocals. 12K with a shelving, which underneath always open up the overall sound, and a high pass filter 160 Hertz. This is without.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
And this is with.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
Without again, focus on this weird low end that the vocals has, and once we engage the EQ, that problem is gone. The EQ is taking care of it without me actually taking care of it.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
Focus on the warn you that it isn't easy. How much buildup of low end we got, and once we insert this plugin, that problem, it's gone. With me only boosting frequency and cutting, 160 Hertz.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
Without 12K.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With the 12K with only 1.6 dB.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
I mean, it's just wild what you can do with just minor changes of dB. Last but not least, again, our trusty compressor with a 4:1 ratio, again, 100 milliseconds of release time and slightly faster attack, just to grab everything that the first compressor is letting through. But again, not a massive amount of compression. This is without.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
And I guess here also what is helping us a lot is the de-esser circuitry of this compressor. This is without a de-esser.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
Let's focus on the word easy. On.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
That's just wild. And on top of that, I added a little bit of plate reverb using, again, the audio track to carve out the low end and the high end, of course, the Abbey Road tricks, so that we only focus on the actually mid portions of our vocalist. Done the exact same thing in the damping portion of the plugin, and use a kind of like long plate with 110, which should be almost a 64th note pre-delay, so that we can start dividing a little bit. You can even see it here, the amount of times it takes from the vocal to reach the reverb and for us to listen to the reverb. This is the vocals without reverb.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
And this is with.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
But you hear the natural decay of this reverb? It's just beautiful. And with the pre-delay we have set up, we have the initial part of the vocals, and then once the vocals fade out, you hear this beautiful tail just fading out right after. Listen again, without first and then with.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy.
With.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. To open up without a doubt of what he stands to gain.
I mean, just gorgeous. You can't just beat it. Again, I'm gonna let you hear the overall song first without everything we just did, and then with, so that you can, again, judge by yourself. I mean, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm just telling you, when you find a product that really works, you might want to start contemplating using it. And when this product is free, it's a no-brainer. So this is, again, the song without.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. To open up without a doubt of what he's.
And this is with.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy. To open up without a doubt of what he stands to gain. Reinventing every word into a good intention. Goes. And no one ever thinks to.
And there you have it. Now again, you comment down below whether or not this plugin's made the difference. As you saw, I didn't use a ton of it, but just the right amount and the right kind of plugin. Last but not least, I wanted to show you this super cool synthesizer, just to show you the possibilities of what you can actually do. So in this case, in Pro Tools, you have the great ability to grab whatever audio you want and actually transporting it, transporting it onto a MIDI track, and that will be automatically transformed into MIDI. And this brings me to talk briefly about the flow motion. Now in this case, this is a phenomenal synthesizer that actually allows you to kind of like tweak the sounds upon really whatever you want to do with it. You can change the type of noises to insert in it. You can start modulating the oscillators and the ADSR. There are plenty of actual presets, which are just crazy. And right now what we're doing is simply dragged part of my bass guitar, and Pro Tools had already shifted all the notes where they're supposed to be. And I'm actually modulating it with this incredible synthesizer. Needless to say, down here you can actually record specific pattern and actually trigger them so that you can create also your dynamic performance through this plugin. But I'm probably going to make another video covering this sensational FM synthesizer more in depth in the next videos. Before I go though, one very important thing, the Waves free plugin packs, it's limited to only one registration per account, providing you one license per registration for use on one computer at the time. Therefore, think accordingly, where do you want to install it? Needless to say, if you liked the content of this channel, please like and subscribe, because that is going to help me to create more content like such. I'm going to leave down below an affiliate link upon which you can actually retrieve this free plugin as an early Christmas plugin. Before the next tutorial, I want to thank you for watching, and until the next one, ciao.
And no one ever thinks to warn you that it isn't easy to open up without a doubt of what he stands to gain. Reinventing every word to a good intention goes unmentioned.